in today's video, I'm going to give you the top 5 ETFs that you need and that potentially can turn you into a millionaire. You don't need to be an expert in order to invest in the stock market. In fact, then there are only 5 ETFs that you need in order to get the best possible diversification and to have the chance of becoming a millionaire. I know it sounds really simple, and that is exactly what it is. There is no reason to overcomplicate it. So by the end of the video, you will regret not having watched this video sooner. However, before we get to it, then my name is Casper, and here we strictly talk about investing and financial freedom. So if you really like investing and you want to retire early, well then press that subscribe button below. But let's get straight into number 1. And number 1 is gonna be one of my all-time favorite investments. And that is the Vanguard S&P 500 Index Fund, ticker symbol VOO. And the main objective of this fund is to track the total return for the S&P 500 index. And that is basically an index that consists of the 500 largest companies within the US. Investing into this fund gains the investors a low cost and a very easy access to all the returns from these 500 companies. But let's have a deeper look into this ETF here. And here we do see the top 10 holdings for VOO, and they have their top positions in Microsoft, followed by Apple, Amazon, Nvidia, and so on. And the top 10 holdings accounts for roughly 31.5% of the entire portfolio. And when looking at the sector breakdown for this ETF, well then we do see that technology is the largest sector, and that accounts for roughly 30% of the entire portfolio. And that is then followed by healthcare and financials. It is pretty safe to say that VOO is very heavily invested into the tech sector, and that is also very easy to see based on their returns, where they are up by 25% year to date. And that is of course absolutely amazing. And when looking at the last 10 years, well then we do see that they actually have a return of 161%. So the return for VOO is absolutely amazing. But let's have a look at their dividends. And even though VOO is not focusing on dividends, then they are still paying a dividend. And their dividend payout ratio is 1.45%. And they have a 5-year growth rate in their dividends of 6%. Overall, that is the dividends for this ETF here not that impressive. However, the returns that you get from this ETF here is absolutely amazing. And that is exactly why it is one of my personal ETFs. So moving on to the second one on my list. And here we have one that is not focused on the stock market, but on other things. And that is going to give you an even greater diversification. And this ETF right here is focusing on the real estate sector. And that is the Vanguard Real Estate Index Fund, ticker symbol VNQ. And no, I'm not talking about putting down 50,000 for a house and then having to manage that and do all of the work. I am talking about investing in REITs or real estate investment trusts. And REITs are basically companies that own and manages income producing real estate. So when you're buying a share of a REIT, well then you're instantly adding real estate to your portfolio without having to do all of the work related to having real estate yourself. And the goal of VNQ is to try to replicate the return of the MSCI US Investable Market Real Estate 2550 Index. And that is an index that tries to capture the returns of REITs in the real estate sector of the market. And this ETF right here has 176 stocks in total, with largest positions in the Vanguard Real Estate Index, followed by well-known REITs like Prologis, American Tower Corp, and Crown Castle. And when looking at the sector breakdown, well then we do see that they are more or less all in on real estate, as almost 100% of their portfolio is placed within real estate assets. And when looking at the performance of this ETF, well then we do see that year to date, they are up by 7.5%. And that is pretty good when taking into consideration that the interest rates have been really high, and that has had a big impact on the real estate sector. And over the last 10 years, well then they are up by 37%. But let's have a look at their dividends. And here does VNQ not disappoint, as they currently have a dividend yield of almost 4%. This ETF here has some really nice dividends. And that also makes sense since they are investing into REITs. And REITs are really known for their high dividends. So if you are looking for something else than stocks for your portfolio, well, then VNQ might be the perfect solution for you. So moving on to the third ETF, and this is an ETF that does include the entire US stock market, and that is the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, ticker symbol VTI. And this is most likely one of the most diversified investments that you can ever make. The goal of the fund is to track the crisp US Total Market Index, and that is an index that represents small to large cap companies. And for the average investor, then is VTI a one-size-fits-all approach. It is a very easy way of investing at a very low cost, and you gain access to the returns for all of the US stocks. The fund currently has 3,800 holdings in total and has largest positions in big and well-known companies like Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Nvidia, and so on. And when looking at the sector breakdown, well, then we do see that technology accounts for roughly 30% here as well. And that is then followed by financials and healthcare. So just like VOO, then is VTI also very, very tech heavy. And that is also easy to see when looking at the returns year to date, where they are up by 25%. And don't get me wrong here, that is absolutely amazing. However, most of it is basically because tech stocks have increased so much during the last year. And when looking at their performance during the last 10 years, well, then they are up by 150%. And that is also a very, very nice return. But let's move on to their dividends. And even though they're not focused on dividends, then they are still paying a dividend. And they have a dividend yield of almost 1.5% and a 5-year growth rate in their dividends of 5.5%. So even though they're not paying that much in dividends, then they are still paying a dividend. And receiving passive income from your investments is always very, very nice. Overall, then is the performance of VTI very, very nice, but it is very, very tech heavy, and that does also increase your investment risk. So you have to take that into consideration as well. So moving on to the fourth ETF on my list, and here we have one that tracks the performance of all stocks outside of the US. And the ETF that I'm talking about is the Vanguard Total International Stock ETF, ticker symbol VXUS. Having exposure to other stocks than US stocks is really important, as it does help to decrease your overall investment risk. And a lot of people are actually combining this ETF right here with the third ETF, VTI, and they're thereby gaining exposure to all of the stocks inside the US and all of the stocks outside of the US. And that is the perfect diversification. And the fund currently has almost 8,600 stocks in total, with biggest positions in big companies like Taiwan Semiconductors, Novo Nordisk, Nestle, Samsung, and so on. And when looking at the sector breakdown, well, then we do see that the biggest sector is financials, followed by industrial, and then technology. And when looking at the performance year to date, well, then we do see that the fund is up by more than 11%, and that is pretty nice as well. And when looking at the performance during the last 10 years, well, then is the fund only up by 12%, and that is not very good. But the performance for international stocks have been somewhat mixed during the last couple of years, especially when you're looking at Asia. They have had some really mixed returns, so that could explain some of it. But the fund is also paying dividends, and they actually have a pretty nice dividend yield, sitting at 3.25% and a 5-year growth rate of 4.6%. So even though the performance haven't been that good during the last 10 years, then are the dividends really good here. And hopefully then some of the performance that we've seen during the last year will carry on forward as well. But if you are looking for worldwide exposure, then it is definitely a great option. So moving on to the fifth and the last Vanguard ETF on my list today. And here we have the Vanguard Information Technology, ticker symbol VGT. And this is an ETF that is tracking the technology sector. Right now we are in a time where everyone is talking about artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and all of those different things that is related to technology. And I don't think anyone can deny that technology is going to be a big part of the future as well. So being invested within this sector might not be the worst idea. The fund does right now have 318 different holdings, with biggest positions in very big tech companies like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Broadcom, and so on. And when looking at the sector breakdown, then we do see that roughly 100% of the entire portfolio is placed within tech stocks. And when looking at the performance year to date, well, then we do see that the fund is up by 54%, which is absolutely insane. But the performance of tech stocks have just been absolutely amazing during the last year. And when looking at the last 10 years, well, then is the fund up by 450%. And that is completely insane to think about. And that makes this ETF right here the best performing one on my list today by far, but it is also the most risky one. And believe it or not, then does this ETF here also pay a dividend? And they have a dividend yield of 0.64% and a 5-year growth rate in their dividends of almost 8%. The dividends for this ETF here is very, very small, but it doesn't matter when you're looking at the returns. It is an absolute beast of an ETF, and they have had an amazing performance, not only during the last year, but also during the last 10 years. And that was basically my top 5 Vanguard ETFs. If there is anything that you would like to add to the list, then please let me know in the comments below. I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, then don't forget to smash the like button below and subscribe to my channel for more weekly videos just like this one. See you guys in the next one.